Sometimes, many times, you leave a teacher. Unless, of course, you're in one of those cults that likes to brainwash you. Teachers are not always for life. They can be for a day, a second, a month, a weekend, a year, a lifetime. The life that you have might have been defined based on some of the seeds that the teachers planted. But what ultimately is a teacher? In my view, teachers don't exist and gurus don't exist. There's only one teacher, and that's you and the celestial world. That is why you need to have a link to the spiritual worlds. This is the problem with religions. They tell you that you can't do it yourself when in fact you can. There is a science for it to happen, but that science in many spiritual traditions or religions is withheld from the common people because they want to keep those people common. No one has the right to speak on the behalf of a celestial spirit or energy. If they do, that is how you obviously get control and power over people, and that in itself is a particular type of black magic, especially if you involve charisma as well. Charisma helping the talons of those imams, rabbis, Buddhist monks and priests rooting themselves in your psyche. However, saying that, there are some very good religious figures that don't do that. Teaching involves learning is understanding, and understanding is internal. External things can help internal understanding, like a situation or an event. The interpretation of that event is internal because everything comes from you. When you externalize understanding, you give away control. When you read texts are not dogma and they are not truth. They speak of a truth, and the text is an interface between you and truth, but it's acting as a vehicle. It in itself is not truth. Texts are not holy, they stand for something holy. There is a story, a Buddhist story, which says the teacher pointed at the moon, but the student only saw the finger. A teacher is someone that can help you grow, and in the more advanced types of teaching, for instance metaphysical teaching, the teacher can talk to you telepathically. But when you move on from a teacher, the relationship should still be there. Affection is the essence of a relationship. And with a good teacher, you should have had affection towards each other. A good teacher wants the student to advance, and if that means that the student needs to leave, then the teacher should be happy for the student. Ultimately, a student should be interested in consciousness and the nature of reality. Understanding the nature of reality can happen in a plethora of different ways, from farming to martial arts, from painting to science. Many times, but not all, skill is needed or helps in order to interpret the nature of reality. If a particular religion says that you need to read texts, the ability to read is a skill in itself. That is why a lot of religious institutions, they promote reading if you go and join them, and that's why in the past they were centers of education, because poor people that wanted to learn how to read would go to them because they prioritized on reading, because they saw just how important it was to be able to have that skill in order to read texts, in order to further your consciousness, because consciousness comes from studying, and it also comes from studying texts, which is very pertinent perhaps to the Vedic and the Buddhist ways. Shamans don't seem to think that they need to read texts, and this is something that irks me, because I do think that in order to study shamanism you should also be reading, which is why a lot of the shamans have a huge amount of problems at this moment in time. Those skills act as lenses, and you see the nature of reality through them. In my opinion, self-reflection is needed because I think all things come from consciousness, and the further you pursue that consciousness through one of those lenses, like for instance martial arts, painting or farming, there should be a state that you reach that harmonizes all of them together. In my opinion, not all paths are the same, and sometimes they can contradict each other. That doesn't mean that one path is wrong and the other is right. This doesn't mean that truth isn't there, it just means that truth is hiding, and truth, I think, is a fickle little thing. It likes to camouflage itself, hide itself in parables, hides itself in between words and in between sentences. Truth doesn't like to expose itself to everyone. It waits until that person's ready, and then it releases itself. And when truth is come by in higher states of understanding, then those paths that seem to contradict each other, that contradiction should evaporate. I don't believe that there are different paths up the same mountain. I believe the paths have their own individual mountains. What I think happens is that when you get to the top of the mountain, you can see what other people see. And even then the mountains have different views. And further down the rabbit hole we go. One would hope that you've reached a state of compassion or something like that. That is understandable. And even then, compassion has its different subjective ideologies. I mean, if you go to a particular tradition and they have monks that do bad things, the head abbot might want to show compassion to those people, whereas a lay person outside of that tradition might castigate and exclude that same monk for doing those things in a compassionate way. So compassion relative to the person that has it and the lenses that they see it through will act differently, because compassion shows itself in various forms as well. Some great teachers do not have consciousness. They have huge amounts of skill. You could take Picasso, for example, who treated women very badly, and a lot of other artists as well. You can have a violent martial artist who has great skill, or a painter that has no soul but a huge amount of technicality. You might want a teacher that has a great skill because you think that learning that skill will act as a vehicle for consciousness, or the pursuit of learning that skill will help with consciousness. And it does, and it doesn't at the same time. Not everyone is going to meditate. People get bored with meditation, and that's a fact. There are different types of meditation. Meditation sitting still and cleaning the mind is not the same as meditation of walking and meditation of painting. Both, in my opinion, need to be done. The teacher that has consciousness, because he may have a different personality to you, may not need those skills which resonate with your personality. Like, for instance, if you are sporty, then martial arts is really good. And if you're a poet, then perhaps poetry and reading are really good. The conclusion, there are different varieties of teacher, and variety is needed to learn. You need to challenge what you've learned. There's nothing wrong growing away from a teacher. A child grows away from his parent eventually, but what you need to have is independence. And sometimes students are really dependent on their teacher, and the teachers might say, okay, hold on a minute, I'm going to do something, and push that student away a little bit. Part of growing is being independent, and some teachers, they don't want their students being independent because it means that they lose money, or they lose face, or it means that their ego isn't as big as it was. I've heard monks say, and I really like it, that the aspiring person that wishes to join them shouldn't, and they should get on with their life, and they should go and do things, travel, work, go to university, and then when they're a little bit older and they've had a little bit of life, then they should go to the monkhood. And I think that a lot of problems with monks and religious people is that they just haven't lived, they haven't had enough experience, they don't understand the world that we live in. The mantra goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But I've seen a lot of teachers appear when students aren't ready and taking advantage of them. It's not the teacher that always has to test the student. The student must test the teacher. If the student is going to follow someone, then the student has to know that the teacher is good. And this is never mentioned because there is an agenda to make the teacher into a demigod, to deify him. This causes abuse. Humbleness is not submissiveness, and humbleness doesn't mean you have to relinquish your control. Keeping control and being humble are not contradictory. Now it's very rare, I think, that you can go and do an apprenticeship with a teacher without paying. Long gone are those romantic days where a student followed a teacher for years and years and was tested and eventually became enlightened himself. I think you should get this notion of enlightenment well out of your head. I think you should concentrate on the process of enlightenment rather than the goal of enlightenment. There are lots of very bad teachers, and I think it's good to pay because the teacher needs money, but also it protects you, because I've seen and been in positions whereby you develop a relationship with a teacher, you get on really well on a friendly level, and then boom, he asks you for £2,000 or £3,000. And then you feel really guilty, and then you feel that if you don't pay, then you won't be his friend, then you won't be able to carry on the teaching. So I think it's best to pay money. So when he asks you for the £3,000 or £5,000, you can just say, look, I've paid and that's how it is, and that's the contract that we've had. It's a really difficult situation to be in, and it's really unfair when teachers put you in that situation. A teacher should be teaching because he enjoys it, and there's nothing wrong with giving, like small gifts, something that he might need to show appreciation. You could give a teacher an apple, or you could give him a drill as a symbolic gesture. It's kind to do that type of stuff, because ultimately what he's giving you should be more, way more than what you're paying. The time of free teaching sadly seems to have gone. The student needs to grow up.